Good evening. So tonight I was wanting to talk to you about mindful advocacy. It's a topic that's been on my mind for quite a bit lately, and I'd like to begin with a quote from an email that came to my desk. I do some environmental Buddhist teaching, and this particular message was routed to me. Here the woman writes, "After years of working in conservation and running large programs that attempted to halt destruction, I find myself in despair about the hopelessness of the task ahead, the lack of care, the ineffectiveness, and the failure. For the first time in my life, I am overwhelmed and despondent about the future and any ability to effect change. After years of feeling driven and energetic, I find myself without vocation and helpless." And these words touched me really deeply because I could have said them myself some years back. Advocacy is tremendously difficult, and the state of the world is that things are getting worse. And so I saw this particular message in my inbox as not just a single voice of change, but one of 10,000 voices that are out there. And I think that part of the problem is there's a tremendous disappointment because it's not really as we were led to believe. Many of us went out and we got the education, and we threw our whole hearts and selves into the projects. And we played by the written rules and the unwritten rules, and we rose into positions of leadership, and yet we continue to lose battle after battle. And the societal and environmental abuse increases, as does the number and anguish of advocates. And unfortunately, I think this is a growth industry of hurting advocates. This is a special brand of hurt, I think. It is not particularly owned solely by people who are career activists, but all of us who are engaged in the world and wanting to make improvements and seek justice and have things be more nurturing and healing for our brothers and sisters that we share this world with. All of us are facing for the frustration. And it occurred to me not long ago that this is a tremendous practice opportunity. This special sense of loss and frustration and pain is a door to liberation. It can address a whole number of things that touch on our practice. It can address our ego. We can look to playing with that sense of aversion that we have to some things and that craving that we have for things to be different. This type of pain and frustration can also touch the arena of the Noble Eightfold Path, because we can set our right intention, our aspirations, and we can practice right speech and deep listening. We can very skillfully work to pick the most effective and healing actions. And we can put in right effort. We can apply our energy in a sustained way, but learn to work in the direction of healing with some ease so that we're not wearing ourselves out. We can choose jobs that are right livelihood, and we can develop right concentration, a focus in our efforts that doesn't have any leaks, that doesn't sweep us away into Facebook and games and all the other things that we do that are distraction. We can really cultivate a right concentration on this, and at the same time cultivate right mindfulness, so that we always maintain our awareness and our attention to what's happening in and around the world, so that our concentration doesn't get us too narrow-minded, but it helps us to hold things loosely and keep adjusting and keep seeing. And of course, mindful advocacy works with interbeing, this notion of emptiness, because it is impossible to be engaged in the world and not really deeply understand that we are interdependent, that our happiness is connected, and that we need to get all beings to the other shore. The other part of right view in the Noble Eightfold Path that touches upon mindful advocacy is the notion of impermanence, and really understanding the fact that this world as we know it is changing, and things are dying around us, and things are being born in every moment. So I've come to understand mindful advocacy is really the centerpiece of my practice. It's the thing that I keep coming back to and keep challenging myself to grow in. And I certainly wasn't always skillful in this area. I think back to 1996 when I started an organization called the Urban Open Space Foundation, which later we rebranded to become the Center for Resilient Cities. And one of the very first projects back in 1996 was the purchasing of 20 acres up on Madison's north side, which was Troy Community Gardens now. And we had a number of partners. I was fresh out of getting my master's degree. I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I knew what was best for the community. And I wasn't yet a practitioner, so I really didn't understand the notion of interbeing. I had started this organization, and it was on a hope and a prayer. And so part of my effort always was to try and build the institution so that it had strength and stability in order to do really meaningful work. I had a very big vision for it. So a lot of the attention that I put into the project was to make sure that the organization was in a leadership role. And I didn't know how to listen very well. And when things happened, like the city of Madison thought that they knew also what was really ideal for this property, and they showed up to a community meeting with a plat of a couple hundred homes for the site. It was a power battle. And the first thing we did was we went to the press. We went to the press because we had a big city to fight. And there were a whole series, it was a long time ago, but I can still remember a whole number of things that I personally did that I would describe as not right action. I was unskillful. And one of the things that I laugh at now is that I was starting a conservation organization, and I was absolutely sure that I could protect this land and do this work in perpetuity. That whatever we were doing was going to last forever. And of course now I know nothing is in perpetuity because of the nature of impermanence. There were a number of very good things that were a part of this project too. It was a very worthwhile aspiration. And I did put in right effort, as did the partners in the project. Certainly working for the organization was right livelihood. It was important work, and gosh knows I had right concentration and sustained energy going into this. But one of the things that I've come to realize over the years of practice, and then taking a step back and getting out of advocacy for a little bit and now coming back to it again, is that traditional activism often doesn't work because it's coming from anger and fear. And it is often advanced by strategies that are birthed in dualistic thought. In this historical world of dualistic thinking, which is us versus them and right versus wrong and all of that, I've come to understand that advocates can ramp up the energy of hatred and delusion in themselves and in other people. And unskillful action with the best of intentions can actually create quite a bit of harm. The intensity of the damage that advocates can create is increasing as people grow more angry, more fearful, and more tribal. So as activists, we need to own that we have the power to make things worse, not only better. And this spring, thinking about these things and really wanting to take it to a new level in my own understanding and practice, and wanting to share this with other people, I launched what is called a community of mindful advocacy. And it's a small collaboration of individuals from across the United States that I've had the opportunity to meet. And they're individuals who embody both Buddhist leadership and lives of advocacy. And we're still getting organized. Some of the people that are involved you may know, Ann Forbes, Chris Petit, Lori Houston, and then people that are living in California within our lineage and also within some other Buddhist traditions, and in Washington, D.C. And Sherry Maples is one of our Dharma teacher advisors in this project. Our vision is to identify, develop, and test secular spiritual technologies that enhance the happiness and effectiveness of ourselves and others who are seeking to achieve environmental and social well-being. So let me say that again. Our vision is to identify, develop, and test secular spiritual technologies to enhance the happiness and effectiveness of ourselves and others. And how we transform our own personal fear and anger as we interface with the world matters. And the methods that we employ to ease suffering in the world are rooted in compassion and aspiration to get all beings to the other shore, leave no one out. I like to think of Thich Nhat Hanh as the quintessential mindful advocate. And his actions are very powerful in their simplicity and in their utter focus. One of the things that comes to mind is when there was the march against the Vietnam War. It was a peace march, and everybody was very agitated in New York years back. And Thai and his the monastics and his followers very peacefully walked through the streets, and they slowed the entire parade home and really made people, slowed the entire parade down, really made people angry until they understood that he was being peace. He was being the very thing that everyone was asking for. And in that moment, everything transformed. And I think this is a really powerful lesson for those of us who are going to the People's Climate March on September 21st in New York City. That's coming up. And if you have any questions and would like to be a part of that march to help to influence some decisions at the United Nations on global warming, I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards. So Thai teaches us that happy advocates will heal the world. That's the next t-shirt that I want. Happy advocates will heal the world. So self-care is absolutely essential. And I think there's some components, 4 in particular, that jump out to me in terms of self-care. And I think we wouldn't normally think of these things as advocacy, but if we're taking care of ourselves, they become advocacy. And the first is that we sit in meditation. And this is incredibly powerful because when we sit, we're ending harm. We're stopping it right there and then. we have thoughts that come up, we have strong emotions, we have all of these things that we just interrupt and declare ourselves to be peaceful in this moment. Another form of mindful advocacy is to nourish ourselves by gladdening our minds. And this can be thought of as sort of the counterpoint to all of the overwhelming bits of information that can crush our spirit. What we do when we gladden our mind is we intentionally seek out those things that nourish us. So, yes, we can think about the pollution in the air that's causing the warming of the planet. But we can also take a very deep and restful breath that will transform our inner climate and gladden our mind. We can be grateful in this moment that we have the trees that are still producing the oxygen. Another thing that is a form of mindful advocacy for our own self-care is to double down on joy as a way to retain our balance. And I have been really playing with this lately when things affect me strongly because they feel so far out on the continuum of what is not right and what is painful. I intentionally look the other direction and figure out how I can really double down on joy to maintain my equanimity. What is it I can do? Do I have to, what Ty calls, close my windows, stop watching the news, don't let the breeze blow into my internal room and blow all my papers around? I can close those windows and actually titrate the amount of bad news I get. And then double down on joy is really, just sitting and making, taking the time to make sure that I am giving myself what I need in that moment. And then also part of taking care of ourselves in mindful advocacy is rest. I didn't do a very good job with that when I was the director of the conservation organization. When I left that role and took some time off, I was surprised that I spent the first almost 3 years sleeping 10 to 12 hours a day. And then one day that switch flipped and I finally had enough rest. And I was like, okay. I thought I might have Lyme's disease or something, but I didn't. So with mindful advocacy, when we look at that other arm, so there's self-care and then there's also the strategies that we employ in order to help heal the world. There's kind of a few things on the do not list, what we don't do. And mindful advocates don't meet force with force, because that's how things escalate. It is not a good use of time, energy, and our love in the world to really try to build institutional strength and material wealth. That's really not what it's all about. And we also don't seek to indoctrinate others into the way we think by throwing out a glut of science or a mass marketing initiative and all that. The idea is not to get other people to see as we see, think as we think, and fear what we fear. That's not the idea. What we can do in mindful advocacy, I think, first of all, is bear witness to what's happening and look deeply and see reality and actually be willing to sit with the discomfort in the state of unknowing. Not immediately jump out and try to fix things. There's one of my favorite stories of the Buddha is of when he was incarnated as a tree. And the tree was rooted between two ponds. And the Buddha stood there as this tree, and this crane landed in one of the ponds that was filled with fish and frogs, and the other pond didn't have any creatures in it. And this stork looked at all these animals and said, "Oh, you should see this other pond. It's beautiful. The sunlight is hitting it just so. The water is very fresh. You can have it all to yourself. You should go there." And the frogs and fish said, "Whoa, no, you're going to eat us. We don't trust you." And he goes, no, really. Why don't we do this? Why don't I take the frog over to the other pond, and he can swim around and check it out, and then I'll bring him back and he can tell you. And everyone's like, "Yeah, okay, yeah, go ahead, frog, go do that." So, the Buddha's standing there. The stork takes the frog, brings it to the other pond. The frog jumps in, swims around, says, "Wow, this is really nice." He wasn't kidding. So he goes back in the stork's mouth, comes back to the first pond and reports, "Yes, it is beautiful over there. I think we should move." And everybody said, "Terrific." And so one at a time, the creature would get in the stork's bill, and the stork would carry it over, gulp, and he'd eat the animal. And he'd come back to the next one, he'd open, take the animal, carry it over, gulp. And in this way, the Buddha watched all of the animals get killed. And he was absolutely immobilized to do anything about it. As a tree, that incarnation, all the Buddha could do was bear witness. And that bearing witness, even when there was nothing he could do about it, was vital, because it provided the seeds of understanding that could be reborn again and again in the future. A second thing mindful advocates can do is welcome the reality of suffering and death and keep going. As practitioners, we can really play with this notion of impermanence and visit it lightly and visit it again and visit it again, and not let the tragedy of loss stop us. And in order to do that, another thing in mindful advocacy is to deal with our strong emotions. And there's this wonderful practice that I learned from reading from Pema Chödrön called Tonglen, which is where we breathe in our pain and we breathe out compassion. And so when we're hit with a wave of something that's very difficult to deal with, we just can breathe it in and breathe out compassion for ourselves and for the suffering in the world. And it's a practice we can do anywhere, at any time. Another thing we can do as mindful advocates in terms of how we interface with the world is to understand inner being and act in service to the whole with an abundance of compassion and generosity, without ego, without anger. And this challenges us to really nourish our allies and our opponents alike, and not get into the habit of enemy making. This is incredibly difficult, but it really gets at the crossroads of healing. Also, Thai talks about going as a river with some ease. And I love to think about mindful advocacy as like that leaf that just floats down into the river and gets swept in and carried along with ease. And I think the art for us is to figure out which river to ride and step into with ease. Because there's a lot of rivers that we don't belong in, we don't want to be in. But if we can align ourselves wholly with the community of people that are going in a certain direction that is healing and making a difference in the world, then we don't have the sense that we have to do it all ourselves. And we can share the load. When there's something that needs to be done but you don't have the resources in yourself personally at that moment, you can turn to a brother or sister on the path with you and say, "Can you carry this at this time?" Mindful advocacy also considers the claims of our ancestors, the voiceless, and future generations. So it's not just about fixing something that's right immediately, broken that we see, but it's really about stepping back and looking at the whole condition of where this came from, where this is going, and all of the beings that it impacts. So in order to do that and consider the claims of ancestors, future generations, and the voiceless, we have to go much more slowly. I like to say that it's too important to go fast. It's too urgent to go fast. It's also really important to include those who have been historically marginalized in decision-making, because if we're going to get all beings to the other shore, then all beings need to participate in the process. Because we can't carry people. Everybody has to be able to walk and get to, or swim to the other shore. So that means we need all the diverse voices there showing up. And we also, as part of mindful advocacy, we look for opportunities that stop the harm, that are holding actions. And then also, we look for opportunities to transform the root causes and conditions of suffering. So, if, for example, there's a case of child abuse, you remove the child from the situation. That is a stopping harm action. But then also, you work with the family to enable them to have the tools and the capacity to be able to take that child again and nurture that child and raise them, and stopping the whole generational transmission of abuse. And finally, I think this has been one of the most meaningful ahas for me about mindful advocacy, is that it's about taking simple healing actions that are within our reach. That this isn't about going out and saving the world. This is about doing what's right in front of you that needs doing. And as a mindful advocate, knowing that it's on every one of us to do the thing in front of us that needs doing. And if that's what we do, the world will shift and transform. The world will heal. So it's not about all the things we can't control. Mindful advocacy is actually about the things that we can. Ultimately, this is pretty messy stuff. There's no recipe for it. And just because we engage mindfully with the world, even if we invoke great skill in our actions, this doesn't mean that we're going to succeed. We may be the tree at the foot of the pond. We may be those who can only bear witness now and who can't actually create the change and bring justice to the situation. Because justice takes generations sometimes to achieve, and sometimes change happens in a heartbeat. We'll never know. But we do know, and we can rely on the fact of the first noble truth, that there is suffering. So even when we do it perfectly, that condition won't change. There's no fix. It's never going to be easy. And it's just this messy confusion with great aspiration. Thank you.